Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. Today's solo flight special is being captained by Wright. Ground traffic control has moved us to the departure lane, and we will be taking off shortly. Please return all seat backs to their original position, and ensure that all tray tables are stowed in the locked and upright position. Now fasten your seat belts. Kick back, relax, and enjoy the show as we soar above the friendly airwaves in comfort and style. Once again, we thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. This is your captain speaking, and I would like to take this opportunity to personally welcome you to this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. We know you have a choice when it comes to your radio listening pleasure, and would like to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. What's more, we're confident that no other radio program or venue will fly you over the friendly airwaves in as much comfort and style, nor leave you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment, quite like we can here at the Wright Flyer. Now that you're aboard, please be seated, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show. We've taxied to the departure lane and are awaiting takeoff clearance from air traffic control. While they go through that mindless, bureaucratic red tape and regimentation, I'm going to go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist because there is a lot of news and information to get to before I may indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, world leaders have concluded a climate change summit in Paris, France. They congratulated one another, claiming that they have set a new global standard to combat the rising global temperatures of no more than approximately 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Folks, what's amazing about this is that they have convinced themselves that this is the greatest challenge and danger facing the entire global population. Yet there is nothing that solidifies the scientific evidence behind this. In fact, if anything, it's rather dubious to claim that it is a profound and proven science. Nevertheless, these globalists are doing whatever they can to encroach upon the sovereignty of the various states that had participated in this, and it is also nothing more than a vast power grab, but also a huge redistributive program where wealthier nations have vowed to help fund and support the carbon reduction of various poorer nations. So, as you can see, this is just designed to once again attack the fuel of industry, which is petroleum, and to embrace greater global controls through utopian socialist policies that have a track record of failure. You know, what it really reminds me of is that pipe dream that was conjured up by President Woodrow Wilson almost 100 years ago in the immediate aftermath of the First World War. Wilson wanted to create a League of Nations that would make it illegal to go to war. It was thought that by pooling the nations of the world and the combatant forces that had participated in the Great War, that they could prevent war, that they could outlaw it with the stroke of a pen. Of course, this was delusional back then, just as it is now. What would become of the League of Nations is that in the run-up to the Second World War, it proved ineffectual in stopping Japan from its war of imperial aggression throughout the Orient, and it didn't stop Adolf Hitler, and it certainly didn't stop Benito Mussolini in their, National Socialist attempts to gain more territory and power. In fact, all of the nefarious radical left-wing dictators of the Second World War era looked upon the League of Nations with contempt. However, this idea of a League of Nations did not die with the failure of the United States Senate to join the group, and in fact, it came back as the United Nations at the cessation of hostilities and the ultimate end of the Second World War as the United Nations. And it is this very organization that is a twisted blight on world politics, as envisioned by Woodrow Wilson nearly 1 century ago, that completed these climate talks. And it's all just a redistributive scheme designed to punish industry, to hurt business, and to champion these radical and extremist left-wing causes. And it's really just a dog and pony show, because the entire thing is not even legally binding. It's just a let's pat ourselves on the back, look at what we have accomplished type thing, and that really carries no meaning or no purpose. In fact, the original father of climate change awareness, a former NASA scientist who goes by the name of James Henson, calls the climate summit a fraud. And the reason that he calls it a fraud is that he believes that not enough has been done, and that it won't really fix the problem. And isn't it funny that it's always that way when it comes to these utopian socialist pipe dreams? Whenever concessions are made, or whenever they claim to have made progress, it is always said that it is never quite enough, and that they have to continue to dip their hands into the pockets of other people to steal their money to once again fund these outrageous programs that do absolutely nothing for anyone. And that's because utopian socialism, just as any other form of socialism, whether it be national socialism, as we saw with the Nazis, or global socialism, as we saw with the Soviet Union, or Fabian socialism, all of them rely on dipping into the pockets of others to give to those who don't deserve, or to chase some pipe dream that has no basis in fact or reality, and to pursue that as if it's the truth. And you can see this in the way that they have changed the name from global warming. You remember when they first started this whole harangue about global warming a little over a decade ago, they were trying to say that it was global warming, not climate change. Well, they've changed the name to climate change, and they want to even push it further to be climate disruption, so that any and all measurable changes in global temperature averages can be used as a rally cry to push for more utopian socialist power grabs, and to further encroach upon the sovereignties of various nations, and more importantly, with respect to the United States, to infringe upon or encroach upon our fundamental and unalienable rights. Now, as Jeremy and I have oft-times repeated on past episodes of the Wright Flyer, our fundamental and unalienable rights are a part of the greatest inheritance and birthright that any people could inherit on the face of the planet. We, as American citizens, either naturally born or naturalized, are the beneficiaries of the greatest birthright of any people on the face of the planet. And that birthright is, of course, our shared United States Constitution. It is what defines us and separates us from all other nations on the face of the planet. And that is what has propelled us to such lofty heights in the past. But of course, you wouldn't ever hear any of the utopian socialists admit this, because it would go against their propaganda, their creed, their mission, and their purpose. Everything about what they do is just designed to further their cause of spreading socialism, which just spreads misery for everyone, irrespective of the harm that it causes to the societal fabric or to the governmental structure of any nation. In fact, that's why you always see these nefarious socialist organizations attempt to tear down the vast and illustrious history that existed in a country before they assumed the reins of power. We saw that with the Cultural Revolution, or the so-called Cultural Revolution in Red China under Mao Zedong, where they went around destroying everything. You certainly see it with Islamofascism, as ISIS gallivants around the Middle East, destroying ancient millennia-old artifacts and monuments, all because it doesn't fit their twisted machination of a death cult that is this medieval philosophy that they wish to thrust upon each and every one of us. And you again see it with the radical utopian socialists here in America that are pushing to erase any signs and semblance of the old Confederate States of America. And they're trying to paint this entire geographical region of the United States in a horrendous and negative light by the horrific doctrine of historical revisionism. And now we're seeing that come full swing with the utopian socialist candidates for the Democrat Party for the office of President of the United States, once again doubling down on their efforts to have the Confederate flag removed from the chapel at the Citadel, because they're arguing that the cadets that were putting on a skit for the Ghosts of Christmas Past were wearing pillow covers over their heads with eye holes cut out, and they said this was reminiscent of the Ku Klux Klan, and therefore it just shows that we need to remove the Confederate flag from the Citadel's chapel. Once again, this is completely disregarding the history, completely disregarding truth, and once again, just, going after one of these emotional feel-good arguments that the utopian socialist left always goes after, because, again, they never can have arguments that are based in rationality or on facts or reality. It's always based on raw emotionalism, and as I have said before, the reason they do that is it makes it easier to manipulate the public to then push for the radical and so-called fundamental transformation that they wish to achieve here in the United States. And as you can see from the examples that I just mentioned, they are hardly different than the Islamic State, Islamo-fascist terrorist organization that gallivants around the Middle East, destroying all of these beautiful, culturally significant ancient artifacts and monuments. And that's exactly what we're seeing play out here. And climate change, and this climate change summit, is just another representation of that dark and twisted, evil, manipulative ideology that they push forward. It's this radical agenda to fundamentally transform everything that's, again, not even really designed to make people equal. That's the great lie that these utopian socialists rely upon, because they come out and they claim that they are doing this all for a sense of equality, yet nothing could be further from the truth, because the only thing that they're making everybody equal in is misery, except for themselves, because they carve out these niches, these little niches from the law, so that they have their own separate code of conduct and law that applies to them, and they expect us to follow the rules and edicts they hand down while they exempt themselves. It's that whole hypocritical notion of do as I say, not as I do. And we see that with the treatment that Hillary Clinton has received thus far with her private email server scandal, and we see it with the treatment that they give to Islamo-fascists who run around and shoot people up. They say that, they don't represent all practitioners of the death cult of Islam, those, that worship at the altar of the false moon god Allah. But if it's someone like Dylan Storm Roof, who went out and engaged in that senseless act of violence at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, back in June, they say that it's like all gun owners, and they apply it and attribute all of his negative attributes to the Southern Cross battle flag. They don't attempt to differentiate. They don't attempt to distinguish. And it's this type of hypocritical double standard that we see not only with the utopian socialist politicians, but their lapdogs in the salivating mainstream media that really disgusts me. And I know that it's not just me that it disgusts, because I'm sure that it disgusts a vast majority of you, our cherished listening passengers and audience. Because when you stop and think about it, they're basically telling you that you're too stupid to think for yourself, that they know what's best for you, and that they will embrace their radical raw emotionalism in order to manipulate you to gain their neo-feudalist type of system. You see, they want to sit over you as an overlord. They want to micromanage every facet of your daily life because, again, they think they know what's best for you and that you are just a backward simpleton that has no inclination as to what is good for yourself. And that's totally diametrically opposed to what our representative Republican system of government is, as underpinned by the natural law tenets that is found within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. Our founding fathers envisioned a land where sovereignty was ultimately wielded by we the people. And we the people delegate certain authorities and power to the various several state governments via via these social contracts known as the state constitutions, and then they, in a representative capacity, selected delegates who then delegate a certain limited amount of power and authority to the federal government via that greatest of all social contracts that has ever been penned by man, yet divinely inspired by providence, that being our shared United States Constitution. So as you can see from all of this, the positions that have been assumed by the utopian socialists, who are not only trying to thrust climate change down our throat, but to erase any signs of our true history here in the United States through this poisonous doctrine of historical revisionism that walks hand in hand with that disastrous doctrine of political correctness. They're trying to reforge the image of the United States. And folks, that's exactly what Barack Obama meant when he stood before the cameras of the salivating mainstream media back when he was running for his first term of office, when he said that he wanted to fundamentally transform the United States. This is the type of fundamental transformation of which he speaks, and it is dangerous. And not only is it dangerous, it's also intellectually disingenuous in the sorts of things that he engages in. Nevertheless, we see that not only are true conservatives or true independently minded individuals skeptical of the outcome of this so-called climate change summit that just concluded in Paris, France. One of their first guys to bring about awareness of it, this James Hansen guy, says that it's a fraud. Well, I agree with him to an extent that it is fraud, but not for the reasons that Henson and other green Nazis like Earth Liberation Front and Greenpeace, who were also very active with this so-called climate change summit, want or claim. For years, we have known that so-called climate scientists and governments around the globe have been fudging and skewing the numbers to achieve a pattern of warming in global temperature data. In other words, they didn't approach this in the typical fashion that you would, utilizing the scientific method. What they did is they approached it with a conclusion already in mind, and they manipulated and muddied the data to fit their preordained answer and conclusion. And that's really not the way that the scientific method operates. It is not the way that we engage in scientific discovery or come to scientific conclusions. It is a complete bastardization of the system in order to push this radical extremist left-wing agenda. And you can see that, as always, it's a push for more governmental control, more concentration of authority in the hands of a few, disregarding the sovereignty of the ultimate wielders of sovereignty as per the natural law tenets that underpin our shared United States Constitution, and therefore it's totally unconstitutional, totally against the interests of the United States of America. But when has President Obama ever really had the interests of America or her people at heart? Because I think we can all recall when he went around the world, gallivanting around the world, bowing to the king of Saudi Arabia when he went on that now infamous apology tour, apologizing for the things that make the United States great, apologizing for the fact that the American citizens are endowed by their creator with fundamental and unalienable rights, and ultimately apologizing for the fact that we embrace exercising those fundamental and unalienable rights. In other words, he was apologizing to tyrants and despots around the world for the freedoms that we enjoy here at the United States. And that is nothing new. That has always been par for the course with these radical extremist left-wing ideologues who care nothing about the decent, hardworking American citizens who are the ultimate wielders of sovereignty, as per our shared Constitution. And you see, that's why they want to say that the Constitution is a living document. They want to paint it in this negative light, that it's somehow some antiquated thing that should be just readily and easily discarded. And then they can redefine us to push forward with their utopian socialist machinations. But we should wholeheartedly reject that here in the United States because it is diametrically opposed to the supreme law of the land. As Jeremy and I have said so many times here on the Wright Flyer, Article 6, Clause 2 of the United States Constitution clearly and unequivocally states that the United States Constitution itself serves and represents the supreme law of the land. These are not just mere guidelines that the government is, called to look to. No, it is actually the supreme law of the land. And there's no way of sugarcoating that, no way of obfuscating that, no way of getting around it. And that is why the Obama regime, at every given opportunity, will do whatever it can to tear apart our shared United States Constitution. Like, for instance, in the immediate aftermath of those heinous Islamo-fascist terrorist attacks in San Bernardino, California, they once again want to clamp down on our fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms, which is actually the best right to be utilized to prevent these sorts of nefarious terrorist attacks from running rampant throughout the United States. Josh Earnest still comes out and says that it's a gun violence issue. Obama still points to some unprecedented global pattern of gun violence in the United States that is unprecedented anywhere else in the world, yet he forgets all of the attacks that occurred in France, including the worst attacks on French soil since the dark days of World War II that occurred last month in Paris, where there were all of these anti-gun laws and it didn't prevent anything. And that's just par for the course when it comes to these radical utopian socialists. They don't care about facts. They don't care about the truth. All they care about is doubling down on their radical extremist left-wing agenda, come hell or high water. And we see that with this climate summit in Paris, because I'm sure you all recall that in the immediate aftermath of those heinous terrorist attacks in Paris, France, Obama rushed to the cameras of the salivating mainstream media in order to proclaim that nothing could be a more powerful rebuke of the Islamo-fascist terrorists than engaging in this climate change debate. I mean, folks, you can't make this stuff up. And I've even got the president saying this with his own lips.
What a powerful rebuke to the terrorists it will be when the world stands as one and shows that we will not be deterred from building a better future for our children.
So you see right there is the major disconnect, ladies and gentlemen, that President Obama has with reality. He's sitting there saying that by having this climate change summit, that represents the most powerful rebuke of these enemies of humanity. He doesn't speak to their Islamo-fascist religious beliefs that are undeniably a threat to a modern civilized Western world at any, at any level. No, it's climate change. And in fact, it goes to show that he believes that climate change is the greatest threat to the people. And again, I've got sound bite number 2 here of the president during an interview with CBS News, where he comes out and he basically equates climate change to these Islamo-fascists who want nothing short than the complete, utter, and total annihilation of the West and our way of life and our philosophy.
And you did say in the State of the Union that no challenge poses a greater threat to future generations than climate change. Do you mean that it's a greater threat than terrorism?
What I mean by that is that we're going to get ISIL. They will be defeated. There will be ongoing efforts to disrupt the world order from terrorists, from rogue states, from cyber attacks. There's always some bad people out there trying to do bad things, and we have to be vigilant in going after them. But if you start seeing the oceans rise by 5, 6, 7 feet, if you see major shifts in weather patterns so that what have been previously bread baskets to the world suddenly can no longer grow food, then you're seeing the kind of crisis that we can't deal with through the deployment of the Marines.
So you see, he says because it's a problem that we can't fix by just throwing money at it or sending out the Marines, terrorism really isn't as bad a threat as climate change, because, somehow the oceans might magically raise some 5 to 7 feet, wiping out entire populations. You see, this again is an ideology and a view that is totally detached from reality, totally based in this apocalyptic vision that somehow the acts of man are warming the temperature of the globe by, I think no more than 2 degrees Fahrenheit, and somehow that's going to melt the polar ice caps, kill all the penguins, and make polar bears feel lonely. That is exactly the twisted machinations and ideology that the president is espousing. And the fact that he equates this to being as dangerous as Islamo-fascist terrorism, which has already struck out and killed Americans today, because what unfolded at San Bernardino, California, almost 2 weeks ago now, was the worst terror attack on American soil since 9/11, 2001. And it happened on his watch. And it was because, again, we have our attention divided and diverted from what's really important, Islamo-fascist terrorism, which is growing by the day. And the fact that the president has been wrong every time about this, he just ignores it. He ignores the fact that he was wrong when he said that ISIS was a JV team. He was wrong when he said that they were contained. He was wrong when he said that it was a mere setback when they attacked Paris. And he was wrong that they didn't pose an existential threat to the United States, because we certainly see what happened in San Bernardino. And of course, he's wrong yet again when he attempts to blame this on ready access to what he deems assault weapons. And I really hate that term because it's both vague and ambiguous. And it really isn't true. Because, once again, how were they able to do it in Paris? A country, a city, a capital of the country of France that has some of the most stringent, ardent gun control laws on the planet. Well, it just goes to show that gun control doesn't work, and that, going off of the quote of Niccolo Machiavelli again, that when you disarm your population, you are dishonoring your population. And that is exactly what we are seeing. But this disconnect with respect to climate change and terrorism continues. Madam Clinton has come out and said that the Syrian refugee crisis that we are facing in this country right now is caused by climate change.
We're in a period of one of the worst refugee crises that we've ever faced. It's an international problem, and I think we should have more of an international response. But then we have to ask ourselves, why is this happening? And why is it happening? Because of terrible governance, because of corruption, because of conflict, because of climate change.
Yeah, Madam Hillary, I'll agree that it's due to terrible governance, like the terrible governance that we saw when you were at the helm of the Department of State, when you were Secretary of State. You allowed these horrific things to continue. Yes, it is done by the corruption of the detente wing, the gutless opposition party, who won't do a thing to stand up to you, because it's already come out that Benedict Arnold Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House, is working in cahoots with Mitch the Turtle McConnell in thrusting down a taxpayer-based funding program to flood this country with unvetted Sunni Muslim Syrian refugees. And this, irrespective of the fact that two of the Paris attackers were so-called Syrian refugees. So again, we're not taking America's national security to heart. We're not paying attention to the real significant dangers, the actual threats that are posed to each and every American citizen. Instead, we're buying into this nonsense of man-made global warming. Yet nothing could be further from the truth. This is not a significant problem that we are facing. It is not a significant challenge that we have to address. It's not even conclusively scientifically proven, as I am about to point out here. Because we have known that for years, the so-called climate scientists and governments have been skewing the numbers. And I'm going to go more into that now, because if you recall, back on November 23rd of 2011, Forbes contributor James Taylor published an article entitled ClimateGate 2.0, New Emails Rock the Global Warming Debate. In this article, Taylor claims that there were three undeniable trends which are occurring with respect to the hoax known as global warming or climate change. And this is now very apparent from a cache of some 5,000 emails between so-called climate scientists. So these three things are: one, that prominent scientists who are central to global warming claims have taken measures to conceal rather than disseminate their data and discussions in complete contradiction to the way that the scientific method is supposed to work. Two, that said scientists view global warming or climate change as a political cause as opposed to a balanced scientific inquiry as would be required by the scientific method. And that three, a great many of these so-called scientists admit to one another that most of the science is weak, as it is dependent upon deliberate manipulation of facts and data in order to show their hypothesis as true. And so you see, again, that is absolutely contrary to the inner workings of the scientific method, and therefore is not something that we could claim is a scientifically sound doctrine or a scientifically sound approach. Of course, they are going to obfuscate that, and they will have the acolytes of this movement come out and say that, this is all being taken out of context. But what it shows is that the evidence is not holding up to the scientific method and is more akin to pseudoscience than actual scientific thought or discovery. And if you stop and think about it, the way that they've hailed Pope Francis coming into the fray here, once again, like Madam Clinton there, calling for more international action on this hoax of man-made global warming, you see that it becomes more of a religion. Because certainly Pope Francis is not going by the Gospels. Rather, he is becoming an acolyte of the religion of global warming because he doesn't want polar bears to be lonely. You know, that's as ludicrous as it gets. But, you know, it wasn't just Mr. Taylor's article that pointed to this. The Daily Caller also published a piece on November 22nd, 2011, talking about the 5,000 leaked emails between so-called climate scientists. Josh Peterson wrote that the emails were similar to those which had been released in November of 2009. That was the first ClimateGate scandal, where, again, it was shown that they were manipulating data, that they didn't really believe in this doctrine that they're pushing for, and that they are just pushing for more governmental control, which has no impetus or effect on global warming whatsoever, because, again, it is not a scientifically proven fact that global warming exists. I don't care what the salivating mainstream media attempts to say about this. The fact remains that no true, rigorous scientific study, as per the governing auspices of the scientific method, has been conducted. And therefore, it means that all of the information that we have seen thus far with respect to this farce of global warming is unsubstantiated, uncorroborated, unsupported. Yet they will again come out, as the radical and extreme left always does, who worships at the altar of supposed climate change and contend that the emails have been taken out of context. Yet I fail to see how one could take these emails out of context. They speak to data manipulation and to convincing governments around the globe that increased centralization of governmental authority holds the key to the solution of man-made global warming. And this is what they have been trying to do from the very get-go. They have been pushing harder and harder to try and centralize the authority, to try and get us off of fossil fuels, even though there has been no evidence showing that this has any correlation or relation to fluctuating temperature changes. And of course, by its very nature, this pseudoscience of global warming cannot be proven, because you can't have a control group, you know, an unchanging group, because the temperature always changes. And you can't have substantially similar situations in which you can reproduce your scientific evidence. Remember, the scientific method starts off by asking a question, forming a hypothesis, using a control group and your study group to test that hypothesis, coming to a conclusion, then repeating the process until it can be reproduced under substantially similar circumstances. Well, you can't get that with this so-called global warming, because no year will be substantially similar in temperatures, and there are cycles that exist within heating and cooling. And let's just look at history for a moment. If you go back to the medieval period in England, the very early part of the Middle Ages, they were able to grow grapes in England, wine grapes in England. Well, you know, you can't grow wine grapes in England today. You know why? It's too cold. And this, once again, speaks to the type of semantics that these radical extreme left-wingers always turn to. So, because global warming no longer fits their propagandistic agenda, they are attempting to change the name of this crisis that they say is the greatest danger facing any and all of us to a much broader thing, to either climate change or even climate disruption, again, so that they can push for their utopian socialist failed policies any time that there is a measurable change in temperature. That is what they are trying to do. And they turn, of course, to the least reliable sort of data recording equipment that we have for this. But, you know, what happened in France just represents a first step towards achieving a global Gestapo to attack the fuel of industry, petroleum. This has nothing to do with science and everything to do with control. Just like the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, or as it's colloquially known, Obamacare, had nothing to do with healthcare and had everything to do with about seizing 1/6 of the gross domestic product, or GDP, of the United States. It's all about control. It's all about taking away initiative and sovereignty from individuals and the various nations and forcing us into this type of collectivist mentality that, whenever it has been tried, has failed. Think back to the type of collectivist farming that Joseph Stalin tried to force upon the citizens of the Ukraine and all, in fact, throughout the Soviet Union. He created an artificial famine because he wanted nature to bow to his will and whims and to those radical socialist ideals. But nature doesn't work that way. Nature doesn't abide by our rules. And that's why, again, I think it is so ludicrous for us to come out and think that man is able to so drastically change the average global temperature. And again, they're talking about a net temperature difference of 2 degrees Fahrenheit. That's really what you would consider a margin of error. It's not something that you would consider drastic. And I don't think it would melt the polar ice cap. And in fact, there are studies out now clearly demonstrating that the ice caps are growing. So the penguins aren't going to explode, and the polar bears aren't going to be lonely. But these radical extremist left-wing ideologues are determined to stick to their guns and to keep pushing for more of this kind of control. But, you know, this isn't the first time that supposed climate scientists have made outlandish claims about apocalyptic climate change. Back in the 1970s, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and Newsweek put out articles claiming that man's actions were plunging the globe towards a new ice age. Again, folks, this is the kind of stuff you just can't make up. And many of these are the same scientists that are now pushing for immediate action on global warming, or, I'm sorry, to go by the utopian socialist title of it now, climate change. So what we see is, then as now, the scientists demanded that the governments of the globe take a more proactive action to combat what was at that time considered a cooling trend, and what is now considered a warming trend, and what tomorrow might be considered a flattening trend. So now, some 30 plus years later, they contend that we are teetering on the brink of a global meltdown. So we've gone from two opposite extremes of henny penny, the sky is falling, and we need to turn to utopian socialist failed policies in order to save the globe. Then how is that even, you know, part of reality? It's not. It's not. It goes to show that these people are detached of from reality and are devoid of any common sense whatsoever. But again, that means nothing to them. It's certainly not going to deter them from doubling down on their efforts to force each and every one of us to accept this new type of global entity and collectivist mentality that they are pushing forward. And it is absolutely going to be detrimental to industry throughout the world. And basically, it's meaningless anyway because it's not a legally binding treaty or document. So this is all just a dog and pony show. It's all a bunch of smoke and mirrors designed for these utopian socialist leaders to come out and pat themselves on the back and claim that they are working to save the planet while they ignore the real problem of Islamo-fascist terrorism, which has actually killed people. You know, climate change hasn't killed a single soul. It hasn't taken a single life. But it has denied attention and taken attention away and distracted political leaders from addressing the real problem that is killing people left and right, and that is Islamofascism and this new global caliphate that wants to push us back into the Dark Ages. That, of course, being ISIS. So, another thing that I want to point to with respect to this climate change nonsense is that temperature data from satellites don't fit the warming trend formula claimed by the same scientists who first proclaimed that the world would be a bastion for penguins and polar bears. Remember, these are now the scientists that are claiming that the polar bears are quite lonely. Back in September of 2015, Climate Depot's Mark Morano published a piece that said there is a new record pause length in warming. He pointed to satellite data collected by remote sensing systems, or RSS measurements, which show that there has been no global warming trend whatsoever for 224 months from January 1997 to August 2015. Stop and think about that, folks. That's what these surface temperature readings are trying to say. We've had an accelerated warming period. But the more accurate recording from these satellites that is not subject to data manipulation, as we've already seen was running rampant from those ClimateGate emails from both 2009 and 2011, they're being ignored. They are absolutely being ignored. And what's more is this UN climate summit that has just concluded relied on so-called surface temperature collection points. These are the same collection points in which the ClimateGate emails clearly demonstrate that the scientists have been skewing the results to arrive at a predetermined outcome. In other words, these are the same types of recording that is not accurate and not compliant with the scientific method. And it just goes to show that it's not science, it's pseudoscience. These are the types of scientific movements that you would have seen in Nazi Germany, akin to the eugenics programs that were carried out in Nazi Germany. Of course, they will say that I'm taking this out of context and that I'm ignoring reality, and they will try to play the utopian socialist game of semantics that they always play, claiming that I am obfuscating the truth, and then they'll turn around and say that I am a climate denier. Do you know why they specifically choose that word, denier? They do it to make it sound like I'm denying the Holocaust, a Holocaust denier. And you know, those that don't believe why they specifically choose that word, denier? They do it to make it sound like I'm denying the Holocaust, a Holocaust denier. And you know, those that don't believe in the farce of global flattening or man-made global warming are just as bad as Holocaust deniers. You see, it's that sort of intellectually disingenuous argument that takes any and all credibility away from these so-called scientists. They are not engaging in an elevated discussion or an educated discussion or even a scientific discussion. They are worshiping at the altar of statism, of which climatology is but a branch. It is this insane and twisted desire to concentrate all governmental power in the hands of a global elite, essentially a new nobility that they push for. And in that sense, what they really are, as Jeremy and I have oftentimes reiterated on past episodes of the Wright Flyer, it's nothing more than New Age feudalists. They are neo-feudalists. They think they know what's best for us. They think that we should just sit down and shut up and accept their superior intellect with respect to any and all of these matters, and that we shouldn't say a thing. But again, there is no solid proof corroborating their claims, backing up their claims, or even showing that what they're saying is the truth. And I've got a problem with that because it is detached from reality. It has no connection with what we are facing as a people and a nation. But again, this is all designed to just chip away at our fundamental and unalienable rights, to once again hand sovereignty over from the ultimate wielders of sovereignty, which, as we all know, is we the people, to this government global entity, this amalgamation of global governments that are not elected by the people, that are not accountable to the people, and is now trying to say that they can rule over the people. But again, as I had said, it is just a dog and pony show because it has no legal abiding authority on any of the nations. And do you honestly think that China is going to stop from using leaded gasoline or from burning coal to embrace this fallacious notion of man-made global warming? Sure, they'll pay lip service to it because that's the popular thing to do, but they are communists, and communists don't care. They will continue to march down the path uninterrupted. They are just happy that this is a way to weaken the economy of the United States further, as we have seen with these unconstitutional efforts by the Environmental Protection Agency and these outrageous executive orders handed down by President Barack Hussein Obama. That is the nefarious, dark, and twisted reality of it that the mainstream media has been complacent with. They haven't vetted it. They haven't exposed it or objectively reported the facts as they are, because, again, they are collaborating with the Obama regime. And the reason they are doing that is because they too follow this radical and extreme strain of utopian socialism that is afflicting the United States like a plague. There can be no question that they are radical adherents to this ideology, and they will never let the facts get in the way of their agenda. It is why Jeremy and I say that they cannot divorce themselves from their agenda. It is that they are totally and completely agenda-driven. And that makes sense when you look at what they have always been about. This is going back to that yellow journalism and William Randolph Hearst's manipulation of the stories in order to curry favor with the first progressive, you know, the father of the progressives, Theodore Roosevelt. And the media has not once backed away from that role. Yet they have attempted to deceive the ultimate wielders of sovereignty in the United States, we the people, by saying that they are reporting the objective truth. They're not saying that they are tainting it or coloring it with their undeniable agenda. No, they want us to believe. They proactively go out and even attempt to state that what they are doing is objectively reporting the facts as they happen. Remember, it was Walter Cronkite that said, and that's the way it is. Well, no, Walter. What you did was not the way it is. What you did was a selective type of propaganda, and it's not boomerang proof. We here at the Wright Flyer are acolytes of the truth. We tell you not to accept what we say at face value, to go and research it, to see whether what we are bringing to your attention is true or not. It's just important that you are exposed to differing opinions, differing ideas. You know, that's why we have the freedom of expression. That's why that is one of the fundamental and unalienable rights enjoyed by the American people. It's so that we can become educated, so that we can find our own determinations and determine what is best for us. And that is why our entire representative Republican form of government is designed the way that it is. We know, as per the teachings of George Mason, who helped draft the Declaration of Rights for the state of Virginia and was pivotal in convincing James Madison, the father of the Constitution, into adopting the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, or as they're more commonly known, the Bill of Rights, had concluded that we as American citizens, whether natural born or naturalized, are endowed with certain fundamental and unalienable rights by our Creator, and that such rights cannot rightfully by any legitimate government be encroached upon, abridged, belittled, or taken away without due process. You see, folks, that's part of the problem with what I have with respect to Obama's no-fly list thing, you know, where he's saying that if you are placed on the no-fly list, even if it's inadvertently, you can't purchase firearms anymore. Well, the fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms is a constitutionally guaranteed right. That means it cannot be deprived without due process. But there is no due process in placing someone on the no-fly list. And there's already 40,000 Americans who have erroneously been placed on the no-fly list. So to deprive those 40,000 people, and who knows how many more Americans will be deprived, of their fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms based on this system that they get placed on it without due process is totally contradictory to the United States Constitution. And as per Article 6, Clause 2, we already know that the United States Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And therefore, this is diametrically opposed, clearly contrary to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. And therefore, anything that is contrary to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared Constitution is void ab initio, meaning void right at the get-go, right at the beginning, that it does not correspond with and does not correlate with the law of the land, the supreme law of the land, which is, of course, the United States Constitution. And the same thing is what is occurring with this so-called climate change summit. You know, they are just bowing down to this notion of global warming as if it is this indisputable fact that it's happening, even though it really has not been settled. And in fact, you know, there really is kind of a fascist approach that has been adopted by the acolytes of this false religion of global warming. You know, there can be no question that the so-called climate change debate is closed in any decisive measure whatsoever. Yet, on September 17th, 2015, the Daily Caller's Michael Bashtish published a piece exposing a letter from climate scientists asking Obama to prosecute global warming skeptics under the RICO statute. You see, folks, what they're trying to do is criminalize dissent. They're trying to criminalize those that are saying, hey, look, you need to abide by the facts. You need to adhere to the scientific method. But that's not what they're doing. They are the ones that are out there saying, no, it's criminal to disagree with us. We have spoken and we know so much, and we believe what we know to be true. And even if the evidence doesn't show it, you're a criminal because we're out to save the planet. If that sounds childish, it's because it is. It's an erroneous argument. It's a dangerous argument, and it smacks of fascism, tyranny, despotism, oppression, and these scientists are potentates. They don't care about reality. They don't care about the truth. They just want to manipulate the people in order to create this iron-fisted government that will leap down from a global scale and deprive us of our fundamental and unalienable rights. And that is exactly what they are committed to. It is what they believe, and it is the only thing that they believe. And, you know, there was a bit of public outcry on it because, you know, Mr. Bashtish followed up that article with another article on September 29th of this year, stating that those scientists which had originally put that letter to Obama had removed it. Why? Why would they do that unless they were starting to feel the wrath of the people? Kind of like how Attorney General Loretta Lynch had to walk back her statements that she would prosecute anyone that engaged in anti-Islamic speech after it was discovered that the terrorist attacks in San Bernardino were carried out by Islamo-fascist terrorists. You see, that's the thing, folks. These radical, extremist, left-wing ideologues and demagogues are diametrically opposed to our fundamental and unalienable right to freedom of expression, just as they are diametrically opposed to our fundamental and unalienable right of freedom of religion and the free exercise of religion. They will stop at nothing to deprive us of our liberties because they don't want us to think for ourselves. They think they are so intelligent, so high above us, that they can do all of our thinking for us. Yet that is completely contrary to the foundational vision that our founding fathers had after winning the American War of Independence and after our United States Constitution was ratified well over 2 centuries ago. And you see, that is the dark, dangerous, and twisted nature of these radical and extremist left-wing ideologues that, you know, they are hardly different than the ISIS terrorists. They are the ones that, as I pointed out earlier, are trying to strip and deprive us of our real history through this foolish doctrine of historical revisionism. They are the ones that want to silence any and all opposition to their pet projects, and they are the ones that want to go around our representative Republican form of government to become more dictatorial and draconian in the edicts that they hand down. And you can see this too with the way that the unconstitutional Environmental Protection Agency went after Gibson Guitar some years back, because it was said that they were using some endangered redwood, but actually that turned out not to be the case, and ultimately everything had to be dropped. But they used SWAT teams to raid Gibson Guitar. Now, Taylor Guitar, which was a known contributor to the Barack Hussein Obama campaign in the first term, and again in the second term, also had this same batch of wood that was used by Gibson. And they weren't raided. Why? Well, they weren't raided because they had a connection with the regime. They had given money to the regime, and therefore they had supported the regime, and the regime was not going to bite the hand that feeds it. At least not yet. Now, I do love the response that Gibson Guitar had to all of that. They created these ugly beige guitars, which they submitted as government issue beige. You know, you have to have a sense of humor about all of this in order not to be consumed with rage, because the vast amounts of stupidity that we are seeing as a direct result of the government's machinations and the twisted ideology of the Obama regime is enough to basically make us stroke out with anger. It's because they are diametrically opposed to everything that this country stands for and represents. They hate everything that has made this country great, that has propelled this country to such lofty heights in the past. If you want to know why we are suffering a stagnant economy right now and why things are not improving in this country, all you have to do is look at the policies of this Obama administration, which is actually a regime, through a constitutional lens. You know, if we went back to a strict adherence to the natural law tenets contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution, if we went back to a strict adherence to the principle and scope and application of the United States Constitution, things would immediately and drastically begin to improve in this country, because we would once again be embracing our identity, character, and heritage and spirit as a nation, instead of being browbeaten with it. You know, looking at the terrorist attacks that occurred in San Bernardino, California, we know that Saeed Farouk and Tashfeen Malik's neighbor didn't want to report their suspicious activity to the authorities because she was afraid of being labeled an Islamophobe. You see, folks, that is the cancerous doctrine of political correctness killing people here in the United States. That is this doctrine of political correctness running rampant and wild. And it just shows how dangerous and destructive that ideology really is. And it should have no place in a civilized modern society, and no place in a free society like that of the United States. But we are substantially less free under this Barack Hussein Obama regime than we have ever been. And that has been by design. Remember, folks, when he said that he wanted to fundamentally transform the United States, what the president was really speaking to was depriving us of our fundamental and unalienable rights, because he loathes and despises what our fundamental and unalienable rights represent, and the fact that our United States Constitution is timeless because of the natural law tenets that underpin that entire document. That is a true danger that we are facing here in the United States today. And it is undeniable, absolutely undeniable, that what this regime has done has made us less safe, has made us less free, and has made us more afraid of a tyrannical oppression by the iron fist of a totalitarian-style government. And that is because President Obama fancies himself as a dictator. All you have to do is look at the arrogance and hubris with which he carries himself. The way that he contemptuously spoke of the American citizens that had concerns about the Syrian refugees, which, by the way, when you look at these terrorist attacks in San Bernardino, proves that they are right. And then to see that he blames our right to keep and bear firearms. You see, it's always the same with these utopian socialists. They are always about infringing upon our fundamental and unalienable rights. They always blame problems on abstract, intangible things as opposed to the concrete realities that are posing the real danger. And that's the same with this climate change stuff. I mean, if it was real, why would the main acolyte, the supreme priest at the altar of climate change ideology, Al Gore, but actually purchase a $9 million mansion on oceanfront property? That's right, folks. Back in 2006, Al Gore purchased a $9 million Montecito oceanfront villa. If he actually believed in global warming and rising sea levels, wouldn't that be a colossal waste of money? Now, I know that most of you are going to come out and say, wait, Randy, he is of the utopian socialist mindset and they always waste people's money. Well, no, they always waste other people's money. In this case, it was from him selling the rights to an inconvenient lie to Al Jazeera, and so it was his own money. So again, it just is a bunch of hogwash, and it reminds me of what one of my college professors said about 10 years ago. She said that if we didn't embrace socialism, that climate change would cause the oceans to rise up in 10 years, and 1/3 of the world's population would be wiped out instantaneously. Well, that just hasn't happened. It isn't the case. We have not seen 1/3 of the globe's population be wiped out by so-called climate change or global warming. And that's the thing, folks. They always lie and obfuscate and don't tell the truth. And it is up to us to discover the truth. And that's why Jeremy and I do these programs. It is to provide you with the truth. But unlike these radical utopian socialists, we don't just expect you to take our word for it. We ask you to proactively go out and research this information on your own, to discover the truth for yourself, and that way to enlighten yourself and make whatever educated decision is necessary to best benefit you. That is why we here at the Wright Flyer call ourselves a state-of-the-art radio program. We provide you with real-world practical solutions. And the solutions that we face for any and all of these problems that are currently rising up from the muck is to return to strict adherence to the natural law tenets contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. That is the solution. And it's funny because, again, this is something that the mainstream media simply will refuse to connect the dots with. And this is nothing short of what I like to call climate hypocrisy. Because if you stop and think about the message that Albert Gore Jr., whose father was a KKK member, by the way, or at least a supporter of the KKK, and was a staunch opponent of the civil rights legislation, another little thing they sweep under the rug, he doesn't want to be bound by the same code of conduct that he's trying to force upon any of us. And it's always that way with these radical extremist left-wing ideologues and demagogues. This is why they are so dangerous. This is why they pose such a significant threat to decent, hard-working American citizens who, as I have said before on past episodes of the Wright Flyer and also earlier in this very episode, are the ultimate wielders of sovereignty in the United States. And so, again, it's just this type of hypocrisy that runs rampant with the radical and extreme left. And we see it with everything that they attempt to force upon us and everything that they proactively believe in. And, you know, while they're jumping up and down proclaiming that climate change is this very gross and real threat that we are facing, and they are trying to convince us that by embracing these globalist initiatives that somehow that will solve this problem that's not even scientifically or conclusively proven to be true, we are seeing that the real danger of jihad by Islamo-fascists is all but ignored by the regime. Now, isn't that interesting? We see that Obama has already said that climate change is the real problem and that it would be a very powerful rebuke of the Islamo-fascist terrorists for, you know, climate change summits to continue in Paris. But he refuses to call those who attacked us in San Bernardino, California, almost 2 weeks ago now, for who they are, Islamo-fascist terrorists. Instead, he is more concerned about the dubious threat of so-called man-made global warming, which, as I've already said, is not a scientifically proven fact. But he also goes out and blames the Second Amendment as the cause for the San Bernardino terrorist attack. The president is already planning to implement executive orders seeking to restrict the purchase of what he deems assault weapons or weapons of war. Now, again, these terms are vague and ambiguous, and they're designed to be arguments made on nothing more than raw emotionalism. And that's because the arguments of the radical and extreme fringes of the left always center around emotional arguments. They're never based in reality or rationality or reason. They are always based on these insignificant little emotional things because that makes it much easier to manipulate the population at large. And we've seen that they actually believe these twisted things that they have gone out and said, irrespective of whether the facts support it or not. They don't want the facts to get in the way of their agenda. So, government's response is always to encroach upon and abridge our fundamental and unalienable rights. This has been the modus operandi of this regime ever since President Obama assumed the reins of political power all the way back in January of 2009. And it's just so detached from reality, so detached from what is actually facing the American people and the challenges that we're having. And of course, all this climate change fiasco is really accomplishing or doing is to hurt business. And we've already seen that in the immediate aftermath of this so-called climate change summit, there's an article by FT, the Financial Times, in the World, and they say that the climate change accord has already been thrown into doubt when businesses and government officials downplayed the impact of the deal, and U.S. Republicans have underlined their opposition. So again, it goes to show that maybe, just for once, the gutless opposition party, the GOP, will actually stand up and do their obligation to ensure that we are not throttled with these ridiculous climate change arguments that have no place in a free society. Again, when you are so detached from reality, it will plague the country. It will make us weaker. And it shows that our president is operating under a delusion. And that delusion is that he proactively believes that climate change is a major threat, bigger threat than Islamo-fascist terrorism. Yet, when have we seen anyone actually killed by this so-called 2-degree rise in temperature, 2-degree Fahrenheit rise in temperature? The fact of the matter is we have not seen anyone killed by it, because no one has been. While on the other hand, when you look at the real threat of Islamo-fascist terrorism, it's already killed people here on United States soil. It's killed people in Europe. It's killed people all throughout the world. All you have to do is spin a globe, and wherever you see the boundaries of Islamo-fascism, you see that they cannot live with their neighbors. And of course, it brings up this whole delusion that has been spread about Islamic belief, that it's the religion of peace. Now, folks, stop and pause for a moment here. Think about that. And that was George W. Bush that came up with that in the immediate aftermath of the September 11th attacks way back in 2001. He said that it was a religion of peace. But if Muhammad is the prophet of the sword, how can the religion that he spread with violence, with death, with destruction, with tyranny, despotism, and oppression be a religion of peace? Well, truth be told, it cannot be a religion of peace. It can be nothing more than an ideology that is destructive, wicked, and evil. And that's exactly what we are seeing. Now, there may be so-called moderate Muslims, and they are starting to stand up and give a little feign response. But I'm still drawn back to the fact that in the immediate aftermath of the worst attacks on French soil since the dark days of World War II, only 33 Muslims of a, I think it was 200,000 Muslim population in Paris actually showed up to show their condemnation of these Islamo-fascist terrorist attacks. It shows you that Islam, especially within the tenets of Sharia law, is more of a political ideology. There is no separation of mosque and state. It is a dangerous theocracy based on the machinations of a pedophile warlord who wanted nothing more than to spread his ideology through war, terror, destruction, and annihilation. Now, how can that be compatible with the West? How can that be considered a religion of peace? Truth be told, it simply cannot. That is the fact of the matter. And again, because it is contradictory to the natural law tenets that underpin our shared United States Constitution, and because it is contradictory to everything that we stand for and represent here in the West and in the civilized world, it is not something that can be accepted. It is not something that can be tolerated. And if they want to assimilate into our culture and into our society, they are going to have to abandon this Islamo-fascist belief set. There is no way around that. There is no way to sugarcoat that or to escape that. That is the truth. And of course, as I have frequently reiterated here and on past episodes of the Wright Flyer, we are out to provide you with the truth. That is our goal. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, this is your Captain Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer, and I invite you to leave any comments or concerns either here on our YouTube page or on our Facebook page or our Google Plus page. And I also invite you to join Jeremy and me the next time we fly over the friendly airwaves, giving you a pure and indelible sense of enlightenment. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, Merry Christmas. Thank you for flying the Wright Flyer. We will see you next time. Take care and Merry Christmas.